Greetings from Peacehaven Evangelical Church, and thank you so much for taking the time to have a look at this India presentation as we look back to our trip from earlier this year and now prayerfully look ahead to January 2020 for our next trip. We fly into Delhi and then get another flight over to Bhubaneswar, which is the capital and largest city of the state of Odisha, which is one of the poorest states in India. And then we drive about 5 or 6 hours along the coast to Paralacamundi, which is on the border of Andhra Pradesh. Here's a team picture of this year. From the left to right, you have Jeff, who's one of our elders, David in the middle, who is the head leader of the home, and next to him is Richard. It was Jeff and Richard who 11 years ago went by faith to visit David and see the work that he was doing there. He had a handful of children sleeping on the floor in one room, and through the church in Peacehaven, a vision was born to see what could happen to build an orphanage or a care home for these children. And as you'll see, so now there's a home that caters for about 55 children and room for more. We rent a 4x4, drive down to Paralacamundi, which is an ancient town of Odisha. The people speak Odia. It's a subtropical climate, very high humidity, which is why we go in the January-February time. There's about 80,000 population, and this city caters for many of the needs of the local tribal villages in the mountains, where people will come and sell their local produce at the marketplaces and meet some of their other needs there. This is a picture from a cashew factory. These people are getting paid less than £1 a day for some real hard labor. And of course, all of the family members, from the youngest all the way to the oldest, have to be involved in the agricultural labors of the town and the village to take it to local markets to sell. Here people are washing their clothes in the local dirty river, drying them in the sun. Very common to see colorful shrines, idols, worshipping the many millions of Hindu gods. Another common sight is seeing people traveling in incredible numbers. I mean, here there's probably 12 or 14 people crammed in and on this vehicle. And when you see this, you realize why the fatalities, the statistics are so high for people dying through road accidents in India. Is 230,000 a year. That's about 20,000 people dying every month from accidents on the road. Sadly, most of them are young. That's 600 a day, that's 25 every hour. And when you're there, you realize why. I mean, here there's a family of 4. You can see the little girl there, and on the mother's lap, there's a very young, perhaps newborn baby on her lap. No crash helmets, no safety precautions. It's incredibly dangerous. It's really like a free-for-all. No laws. And it's very, very, very dangerous. The tuk-tuks and the motorbikes, and this is a typical kind of traffic jam that you might see up in the mountain areas, and that brings us to the home of life, which is in the countryside region around Paralacamundi, and of course this is at the heart of this presentation. This is such a work of grace, an amazing miracle because of the hearts and faith of people that wanted to support this work over the years. There's still, of course, much maintenance and supplies and things that are needed on a regular monthly basis, but the home is pretty much complete. And it's not only a physical home for these children, but a spiritual home. There's 5 volunteers, are all Christians. There's Bible teaching and prayers, and these are really some of the most beautiful, happy, thankful, well-behaved Christian children you could ever hope to meet. Just such thankfulness for the little that they have. I took this picture because it's of the oldest and the youngest children in the home. Yuvrav is 18 And now he is in college studying, hoping to be a policeman. And Rahil is the youngest at 5 years old. In fact, the two children in the front there, the little boy next to Rahil, both of them lost their parents in the hurricane that hit last November. In fact, all 13 of these children are new to the home from 2018 to 2019. 13 new children added. And of course, it's because of their circumstances. Different ones becoming orphaned or not having anywhere to live. And we have room for many more children, but of course, because of the costs involved, we're not able to take them on board right now. This is some of the maintenance work we were able to get done this year, basically tiling the upper level, putting in new safety barriers and tiling the stairway and all of the upper rooms, which is an incredible upgrade for the home. We're so thankful that work could finally be done. This is the small kitchen that caters for the needs of the 55 children currently in the home. These are volunteers making the food. Mainly the diet is rice, of course, and other things, but a lot of rice. We were able to do these little Bible teaching with the children every morning, every night. It was such a joy. I would use the sketchboard or a whiteboard and do stories. This one is the Luke 15 in their Odia language. It's the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son, and then of course the lost sinner. Jesus came to seek and save that which is lost. So they love these stories. They just drink them in. They're so thankful. I was teaching them English Christian songs with the guitar. Oh, and they just loved it. Here we gave them the gospel bracelets, and they were so thankful to receive those. In fact, we use those bracelets. We take hundreds and hundreds of them up into the mountain villages. They're a great tool of evangelism as we travel through the villages. This girl next to Richard, this young girl, Sujata, Richard met her on the first trip about 11 years ago. She was a little cripple girl begging on a pallet. She'd broken her leg. The local witch doctor had reset it 2 times, made it worse. She would have been crippled for life. And Richard had compassion and couldn't get her out of his mind, and raised the money for her to get proper hospital treatment. That's when he first met her 11 years ago. And of course, that's her today as a healthy young Christian girl going to college now. Every year we'll do a day trip with the kids. We'll take them down to the Bay of Bengal. We'll be swimming with them in the Indian Ocean. It's quite an experience, I tell you, to be swimming in the Indian Ocean with 55 of these precious children. Most of them would never have seen the ocean before and would never get to see it each year unless we were able to do this day trip for them. When they saw the sea first, they were a little apprehensive, but afterwards running and splashing and playing, it was beautiful. Here we are in the palm tree forest, just sharing a Bible devotion with them afterwards. This is the result, again, of the hurricane that hit last November. This was a full forest the year before. You couldn't see through it, and many of these coconut palms just snapped like toothpicks because of the hurricane. Here we stopped for an ate at a restaurant. This guy was taking pictures of us, never seen a foreigner before. It was so much fun. An unexpected opportunity we had was we were invited to a Christian school. When we arrived, there were about 300 children standing, waiting in the courtyard. We gathered some thoughts together, and with a translator were able to share about the Christian faith. Of course, with some sensitivity. We can't be too open about the gospel, but nevertheless, it was a very, very special time. Another extension of the Home of Life is Open Ministries. This stands for Odisha Peacehaven Evangelical Network. And these are 11 churches now that David and some of the others, they go up and visit by motorbike up into the mountains. They visit these villages, and we went up while we were there. And of course, this is why you need a 4x4 because of the access. And even then, sometimes you get a bit stuck. This is one village we went to, Baransing. Again, most of these people never seen a foreigner before. They met us outside of the village and with a band. At first, I didn't know what was happening, and then I realized it was they were escorting us into the heart of the village. And as we walked along the street, people were coming out of their houses and joining us along to the church courtyard, where they washed our feet and greeted us and honored us as their guests, or took us into the church where people were gathered and waiting, and we preached a message there. We preached through a translator, in fact through two translators, not into Hindi, but these are local tribal dialects. HK there in the middle speaks 7 languages fluently and was our translator. Here we prayed for some of the leaders of our churches, and after we preached, I said, well, what should we do now? He said, could you preach again? And I wasn't sure, so I asked them, would you like another message? And they all, cheered, and we preached another message for about an hour. And then outside we gave the gospel bracelets, which they received so thankfully. We ate together there in the courtyard, had a walk around the village, incredibly poor conditions. This is another Christian village we visited. This is where the Lima brothers, HK, David, and also his brother Michael, originally came from. It's about 1,000 people. You'd walk around the village, one side to the other, people coming out of their small houses, again, very poor conditions. These precious young people we were able to lead to Christ, because, of course, even though it's a Christian village, a few generations pass, and, of course, it becomes nominal, and many don't really understand the gospel. This precious lady asked for prayer and then led me into the back room of her little house to her friend who had a broken femur. And she'd been there in agony for about 10 days, not had it treated, just had like a dirty rag tied around it, and asked for prayer. And as I prayed, I just was so moved in my heart that we would help this lady. Someone had, in fact, given me some pounds to just for
another village
need
we
I would see. And that's the challenge. There's so many needs everywhere.
Most of these people never even
but it became clear that we would help this lady. And I think for about £30 or something, we were able to help her get an X-ray, get it set right, get it treated. And this is the type of thing that otherwise would leave them, crippled and unable to work. And breaking bones like this is not uncommon because of the malnutrition and calcium deficiency. So we're able to get them calcium supplements as well to help. This is HK's family honoring us. This is where they would cook their meal. That's meat hanging out to dry, hanging on the wood there. This is the very basic conditions where they would cook for us. That's the kitchen. No appliances, no electricity, just cooking over the open flame. This is the main room. You can see a corrugated roof, very, very poor conditions, newspaper for the tablecloth, and just honouring us with their best as their guests. Then we went up to a quarry village. This is about 2.5 hours drive to get there, way, way up in the mountains. And we spoke there in the little white brick-built church at the end of the village, where they received the gospel with great thankfulness. An unexpected treat we had was to be invited to a conference up in the mountains. I said to David, what are we doing tomorrow? He said, you'll be speaking to about 1,000 people up in the mountains. So we drove up there. Again, you can see these men never seen a foreigner before, and got to speak to these precious believers that are gathered from different villages in the mountains to this one place for this conference. It was such a privilege and a joy to be there. This is another village we visited, the village of Balda. where there is a small group of Christians in this Hindu village where they face a lot of persecution because of their faith. And here was the opening of their new church. You can see that little building is their pride and joy. It's basically made out of cow dung, pasted onto this very basic wood frame and a corrugated roof. This is the pastor and his wife in the front. They were so proud of their new church. That was last year. Sadly, this is this year, where the church had been completely destroyed again by the hurricane that hit in November. So we prayed with them that God would raise funds for them to be able to build a new church. Often one of the ways to get up to the village was by motorbike. This is probably the first and the last time I'd do this with Michael, but we went up to the village of Katoomba, very, very poor village. We went up to comfort the family who had just lost the father there, had had an accident. And while we were there, one of them climbed up a palm tree, threw down some coconuts to give us as their honored guests while we were there. And then on our last Sunday, we visited the village of Ranglamet. Now, again, the access, incredibly difficult to get to. It took us a couple of hours. I went just with HK. And you'll notice in a lot of these villages are these lovely small white-built churches. These date back to the Canadian Baptists who came in the 1900s during the missionary era. It was the Canadians who really evangelically pioneered the state of Odisha. And they built these churches there, and many of these villages became Christian because of that. However, when I was there, it became quickly apparent that now many of these villages, although they call themselves Christians, they are quite nominal. A few generations have passed and they've really lost the gospel. Not unlike Galatians, when Paul wrote to them and said, "I marvel that you're so soon removed." And that was the case here. So it became apparent when I was visiting this particular church. I did a message there on grace and on salvation and on eternal security. And afterwards, the men, the leaders of this church, came up to me, and this is what they said. They said, "No one ever told us that salvation is free before." It was a very powerful moment for me. I realized in that moment that there's such a need for teaching and discipleship and to be able to get resources to these men. So this year when we go, we'll be doing a couple of days seminars with just the leaders and teaching on eternal security, on the gospel, on the book of Galatians, on discipleship. And also we'll be recording all of our messages that we preach up in the villages and making them available with the translation for these churches as a resource. The need is great. Please be praying for support and ministry in these mountain villages. One other extended ministry is the leper colony. I'll never forget the first day I walked onto this colony, which is for about 25 lepers that have, of course, been ostracized from society. The conditions are so poor. You're just holding yourself together. You're so broken at the conditions these people live in. We managed to have money to raise to buy some month's supply for these precious people. About half of them are believers and Christians, and one lady said, "Oh, these supplies that you bring will meet our needs for some months. But most importantly is that you bring the gospel and the love of Christ that will change our lives forever." And when they say these things with thankfulness, you're so moved and so thankful that you get to do this. This girl, Swati, in fact, both of these girls, I had the privilege of being able to lead them in the faith on the last day of the first trip. And they have Bibles, they're growing in their faith, and to see them again this year was such a joy. Lastly, back to the home of life. Here are the children dressed in their uniform. They actually walk to school a couple of miles every day through the wooded jungle area. I, in fact, walked with them that day and accompanied them to the school. Again, they never see foreigners in this area. So when the principal they saw that I was there. They invited me in, took me around all the classes where I got to visit the teachers. Again, incredibly poor conditions. You'll see many of the children don't have shoes. They sit on these mats. The walls are filthy, dirty. No equipment, no whiteboards, no computers. And many of the children in this particular school are children from the home of life. That's an example of the Odia language that they speak in, the local dialect. This is another picture of Rahil. She is so precious. She steals your heart from the moment you meet her. So beautiful. Lost her parents last year, and now the home of life is her physical, spiritual home and her new family. On the last day when we leave, you could only imagine just the tears, the thankfulness, the hugs, and as we pull away, there's just a lump in our throat, and we're just so broken as we say goodbye to them. And of course, they're also the same. And I think when you leave, you are overwhelmed with the sense that this work is such a miraculous work of grace. And you really sense the privilege of what it means to be a part of it. Part of it as a local church here in Peacehaven, or part of it